So first, can I ask you to introduce yourself and what you do for Lewis and Clark and what you do more generally?
Yeah, my name is Thad Peterson, and I'm a director of a tour company, safari company in Tanzania, East Africa. We do host a number of educational type trips, and Lewis and Clark is probably one of the longest programs that we've been involved with hosting students over here in Tanzania.
Fabulous. Thank you. So the first question is, can you introduce one important case of biodiversity conservation in your area to viewers who may not be familiar with it? It might focus on one particular species or one particular habitat. And maybe you can explain also why this case is significant to you.
What I'd like to introduce is a program we call the Simanjaro Grazing Easement Program. And this is a collaborative effort between the pastoral Maasai who live here in northern Tanzania and safari tour operators in an effort to protect important grazing areas on the Maasai steppe in northern Tanzania. It's significant to us as tour operators, but significant in terms of biodiversity conservation, in that it's provides habitat protection of grazing and pasture lands that are good for both livestock, but also wildlife. The grazing easements cover the traditional dispersal area and calving grounds for wildlife ungulates from the Tarangire National Park when they leave the park during the rain or wet season. The Simanjaro grazing has been a program I think is quite connected to Lewis and Clark University, in that probably all of the students who come here have a first chance, a real chance to visit and sort of see what's happening there. The reason it's so important is that Tarangire National Park, which is totally set aside for wildlife and was gazetted way back in 1970, it was set up to protect the dry season water resources for wildlife, the really important critical areas in the dry season. At that time, the much larger wet season dispersal areas were not included in the park. Probably 7 times the area of the park are used by wildlife when they move out during the wet season, during the rainy season. And now, and the reason for that probably is that human density pressures from humans outside of these areas was very minimal. The population was small. But now we have a human population doubling every 20 years in Tanzania. Pressure from humans in these habitats is now very high. And a lot of the corridors, the calving areas are threatened and being even converted to agricultural or settlement areas.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, the second question is, how successfully have knowledge and action worked together in this case? What forms of knowledge and action? Can you please give an example to illustrate what you observed?
we think that we've been very successful in sort of putting knowledge and action together. Knowledge of the issues and potential conflict between the human population, the Maasai, and wildlife, but knowledge that the Maasai still very much value and need pasture land for their culture and their pastoral livelihood, their livestock livelihood, still very important. So, and knowledge that in the Tanzanian political context, the Maasai as a community have ownership and rights to their land and village areas under the current land laws. And they can make decisions to manage land use. So knowing that, and given that, the Maasai and tour operators like ourselves were able to collaborate and to successfully put in place a mechanism to protect large areas of the traditional pasture lands from being cultivated or used for other purposes. And as a result, so the Maasai are using their rights of ownership under the land laws to designate grazing areas which benefit their livestock, but at the same time benefit the wildlife of Tarangire during the wet season. And keeping the wet season calving and grazing areas open outside of the park is key to the integrity of Tarangire National Park. There's some tour operators and lodge owners recognizing how important this is for tourism, committed to pay an annual grazing conservation fee into the villages for their, to use for development. And sort of just provide an added economic incentive to keep those areas from being cultivated, which would, go against wildlife as well as the grazing economy.
And what kind of a difference has it made? Is it changed the ability of, have you seen differences in terms of numbers of ungulates and such that breed or survive or live there?
Absolutely. Part of the program when we started it and we got some funding also was to establish village game scouts who help to monitor, look at anti-poaching in the area, but also collected data. And it got quite sophisticated in that they would have handheld smartphones and be able to do transects, and this data would be downloaded into a bigger program, so you can have every month they would go the same areas. And so we have been able to show that the wildlife species density diversity has in those areas been sustained, in some cases increased, particularly with like the wildebeest that are the biggest ungulate coming out of Tarangire. Those have been successful. I think that the key and the exciting thing about this was that you're working with these entities, these political entities that are pretty much Maasai communities, and they were protecting their livelihood, but they got like this extra revenue, which is kind of insignificant if you look at the livestock industry, but it still was added value that it was almost like ice cream on the cake. Right. And that attracted neighboring areas who said, whoa, why aren't we doing this? So what's happened, we started this over 20 years ago, still have things in place. And now we're expanding into a much bigger landscape and trying to get connectivity from Tarangire right through the Maasai Steppe, all the way even over to the River, and so that's the exciting thing about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Okay, so we know that there are many threats to biodiversity around the world, but there may be important opportunities as well. So in this case, what do you see as the best opportunities for conservation, and what forms of knowledge and or action would be prioritized for those opportunities?
One of the lessons that we continually learn, and even from our own experiences, I think, as wherever we are in the world, but when people are empowered and have rights and responsibilities, and are involved and benefiting from the resources, habitats that they're involved with, and land areas, this is when it works best. This is when conservation of habitats, of landscapes works best. People are actually empowered and can do things, can manage it. So this is a general sort of principle, but it's one that we use all the time. A foundation for biodiversity conservation, whether you're looking at a protected area and the people surrounding it, or you're right within community land. The challenge and the overriding issue when you're talking about conserving landscapes, maybe keeping agriculture or this, is that we do have significant population growth. The corresponding needs and wants for resources have to be considered. So there's got to be a recognition in that area and with the people on the recognition of limits. And how do you look ahead? What kind of decisions do you make on immigration of people into an area, because it just complicates it the more there are. What about decisions on family size? What about decisions on consumption? How can we live well but use less, be greener, be more efficient, have less waste? And I think that as we look at what's happening in these grazing conservation easements, the future is going to be, whether the community will look ahead and take these kinds on. What's in place is a protection and a security of land for people who find it very important. But having that security, having that land tenureship also has to translate into productive economic productivity for that community. You have to manage that place so that everybody benefits more. And so it's challenging, but I think it's still one of the offshoots of this program was the development of a legally binding kind of land designation under the land laws of Tanzania called the CCRO. That's a Community Certificate of Right of Occupancy. And that really solidifies sort of like the agreements we started with were a bit wishy-washy. I mean, this now takes it and puts it into a legally binding contract. And communities have really taken this on. Maasai communities, the pastoral ones, the ones that want grazing land, so important to them. And so now we're looking at hundreds of thousands of acres being put into these CCROs, which allows that community to determine land use. it's again, a very exciting venture. But it is going to be a question of, can the needs of people be met, you know, from that kind of a land category? I mean, you know, can you make enough for what people need to get ahead and to live good lives?
Do you feel like the government is a helpful partner in this, or are there certain roadblocks around these cooperative ventures?
I think there's maybe like governments all over the world. There's sectors that are very behind it, but sometimes we're not coordinating with other sectors. So an area where the Maasai are looking to put more grazing, you may get a government program that says, no, we want you to try farm beans, and they like start buying people tractors, and they get this huge, you know, conflict. But mostly, if you start at the grassroots, you use the legal basis of the land laws, and you work it right through the upper levels of government, you get good support, and the village communities get good support. The one real thorn in the whole thing is that the laws, the laws regarding wildlife still, the upper levels of government really do not want to relinquish control over wildlife, managing them and benefiting from them. They do not want to really go the route of empowering local people to have more of a say. They're doing these much more sort of, okay, you know, we're gonna let you benefit from it, but you've got to, you know, you don't really have the final say. The final say will always be the government, and that's hard, because when you don't own something, you don't feel like you have a say in determining how it's used and how you can benefit from it, then it's much harder to want to conserve it and to do good things for that resource. That's a problem. But it's changing in that Tanzania has a history where a lot of wildlife outside of protected areas was actually used mostly by the professional hunting, you know, the old Teddy Roosevelt hunting safari kind of thing. And that whole industry is on a downslide. I think there's just a public sort of like, it's not the way of the future. Too many pressures on wildlife, and, you know, going out and shooting trophy animals. You know, you don't get good vibes from people who say that.
Right.
So right. I think that is slowly dying, and non-consumptive type of tourism is coming in. The crux for Tanzania and many countries like Tanzania, when it comes to conservation and biodiversity conservation, is that we do not have the resources to subsidize having parks for recreational purposes. So basically, biodiversity conservation here has to pay. It can't just be because it's a good thing. Right. It has to have an economic benefit. And tourism is traditionally one of those. Yeah. The main one, the main driver. But it's a fickle thing, as we just found out. Virus, security issue, something can change it that quickly. And so then, you know, it becomes, how do you know, what are alternatives? One, is there a way to endow important wildlife areas so that, you know, even without tourism, there's some money coming in. I mean, right now, the Serengeti National Park is absolutely dependent on a wildlife organization like Frankfurt to keep it running, Frankfurt Zoological Society. They really aren't, you know, no revenues are coming in.
Yeah.
And, but the other exciting one, and I just sent you a link to this, is carbon credits. So it turns out if you do not plow up things, if you do not clear the landscape, you're sequestering carbon on that carbon cycle, and we're coordinating with a company, Carbon Tanzania, and man, they are able to raise tremendous amount of money for communities who keep landscapes from being cleared. So that's an exciting new sort of way that
Yeah.
people can. Also, you can edit all this or whatever you need to, but also I think quite exciting, and it should be coming out quite soon, is there's an organization we work with, also conservation organization, but they are coming up with an app that will try to be able to connect individual people to conservation efforts and individual people in common, doing conservation around the world. So you're going to sort of bypass maybe large conservation organizations and directly say, okay, I know here's a Maasai, he could plow up this 25 acres or he could leave it so that it benefits his cows and livestock, wildlife. So maybe you get 10 people who say, as long as you do not do that, we'll send you $1 every month straight into his account. Anyway, interesting concept, and I think it has a potential that could personalize conservation, a kid, or who knows? Yeah. Anyway, another aspect that may work.
Yeah. So technology is playing a role as well in helping to make this more seamless